Welcome to London's Northern Heights and the land of the dead. I'll explain that in a bit. So yeah, I'm finally going to make my Crouch End video, a Crouch End video, rather than the Crouch End video. I've ended a video here and I've passed through Hornsey on the Moselle Walk. I'll link both of those videos below. But I've never got round to doing a video just centred on Crouch End. And we'll probably go up to Muswell Hill, I'm not sure, or Alexandra Palace. But it's odd because this is one of the places that I love wandering around the most in London, actually, going back to when I was a student and I lived just over the railway lines in Harringay on Whiteman Road. And this is what I would do when I had some time off, is just wander around Crouch End. And consequently, over the years, it has that association for me. And so it's something I do at least once a year, if not twice a year. It's just get off the train at Crouch Hill like I just have done, or if I'm somewhere else, just come up here and just wander around, because I love the streets around here. They feel so sort of pregnant with stories, and they have been in a lot of stories, but we'll tease it out as we go. Some of you who've read my book This Other London will have read the little section I wrote about Hornsey there, but this is just going to be really a stroll around Crouch End. I want to try and keep it in the spirit of those perambulations that I have done over the last 30 odd years. And in the spirit of it being a bit of an amble, I have actually instantly changed my route. I was going to walk all the way along Crouch Hill into the Broadway, but actually I thought, do you know what, I fancy walking along Hornsey Rise. I haven't walked along there for a few years. I always walk up Crouch Hill, so I've turned off Ashley Road into Ashley Road, and I'm going to connect with Hornsey Rise. I don't think I've ever been down this road. And when I first came to London, Crouch End and Hornsey was really known as kind of like bedsit land. It seemed like everyone that you met who was like a budding comedian or artist or writer lived in a bedsit in Crouch End, Hornsey Rise. It became a lot more bourgeois at that time in the 80s, 90s. But it comes from when a lot of these houses were left sort of empty after the war, and they were bought up quite cheaply by landlords who just split them up into lots of bedsits. And yeah, when you looked for housing, it was always Crouch End and Hornsey where you'd see these rooms. Yeah. Hornsey Rise is a lot less picturesque than Crouch Hill as an approach to Crouch End, but it was good to take this route. It's interesting, we're on Hornsey Rise, and this was once the borough of Hornsey when, up until 1966, when it was absorbed into the London borough of Harringay. We're actually in Islington right now, we're about to cross the border. But the origins of the name Hornsey, which is quite, and Harringay, I think they have the same common root that's said to come from Old English, meaning a hare meadow. Hare is in the large rabbit-like creature, which I think is really beautiful evocation, isn't it, of when this would have been meadows on the upper slopes of London's Northern Heights. We're really quite high up now. From Hare Meadow became Harringay, and somehow Harringay got shortened to Hornsey as well. I'm going to have another look at that later. That was just from my initial reading, but we're strolling through the Hare Meadow here. Not meadow. There's said to be a couple of ancient routes that pass through Crouch End, actually converge there, and one of them crossed here across Crouch End Hill. I think part of the purpose of these ancient byways was a pilgrimage route up to the well at Muswell Hill, the mossy well, the mouse well. Down here is the wonderful Parkland Walk, which was converted from the old railway line, or railway lines I should say, which connected to Muswell Hill, Alexandra Palace, Crouch End, Cranley Gardens, Hornsey I believe, and it bit the dust at some point. I'll put the dates on the screen for when it ran. But now it's this wonderful walk. I have walked it in the past and I will link to that below. Yeah, and here's a little potted history. I mean, I have got a whole book about it in my bag as a pamphlet, but opened in 1867. And you can see in the 1930s they planned to transfer it to the Northern Line, and then it continued to Alexandra Palace until 1954 when it ceased, and then the last freight trains ran until 1964. But it looks like it was used to transfer tube trains until 1970, and this was, I guess this was Crouch End station here, right? Part of the folklore of the area, Crouch End, and this Parkland Walk here comes from when Stephen King, yes, the great horror writer Stephen King, was visiting a friend in Crouch End, and then early one morning he took a walk along the old disused overground Parkland Walk before it had been turned into this kind of clean public utility when it was wild and overgrown, and he had a mystical experience down here, a spooky experience that shook him to the core, and he consequently wrote a short story called Crouch End, which I have read. It's in a collection of short stories, and it is a genuinely terrifying story. And there is something about Crouch End which does kind of give birth to those kind of dark stories. There's a real heritage to it. We'll talk more about that as we go along. But there's something in the hills up here. These hills have eyes. I have actually only walked this southern section up to Highgate of the Parkland Walk. There is a northern section which follows the line up to Alexandra Palace, so perhaps we'll do that today, maybe. See how we go. You never know when you enter the uncanny suburb of Crouch End. Time gets warped, place gets warped, strange things occur up here. And this little footpath will bring us out onto Crouch Hill, back onto Crouch Hill, one of the other old ancient sort of roads through the area. These gate posts here at the driveway to Albert Mansions call to mind a more illustrious past than an apartment block, don't they? I think this must have been perhaps a vicarage, because there's a vicarage path leading beside it. What an amazing view here across the valley with the Moselle trundling down there beneath it, and you've got Alexandra Palace up there on the far hill. I feel like we should prioritise going up there over Muswell Hill. I feel like Muswell Hill is in a video, but I might be wrong. The common perception of London, of course, is like the City of London, the West End, Buckingham Palace and all that. But London is a city of hills and river valleys, watersheds. You know, look at that Capitol Ring video from the other week. All the incredible views across the Thames Basin from there, the views here. This is London. I love it. Maybe it's one of the reasons I love Crouch End. One of the great sights of Crouch End is just down here, actually. Good story. One of the many great stories, myths. I'm pretty sure that Lydia Brasserie over there used to be a place called the World Cafe. It was quite a kind of cool place. I did a couple of shifts in the kitchen there in, was it 1992 or 1993, washing dishes. And this church here on Crouch Hill was a recording studio that was owned by Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics, famously. So many acts recorded here over the years, U2, all sorts. I'll put a list on the screen. But it's attached to one of the great kind of stories of Crouch End, one of its great myths. And the story goes something like this. I'm going to do it off the top of my head because I think part of the beauty of this story is it's told and retold so many times. It gets embellished and changed. So I'll add another version, but it's wonderful. Is when Bob Dylan came to record here with Dave Stewart at the church studios, and he got a cab, got out of the cab, and I think he got a bit disorientated. I think he went to a cafe, and he went to where he thought the address was. He knocked on the door of what he thought was the correct address, and he asked for Dave. His lady opened the door, and he asked for Dave, and she said, well, come in. He's not here at the moment, but he'll be back soon. Would you like a cup of tea? So he sits down, has a cup of tea in this house. And then eventually Dave arrives at the house, comes home from work, and it's just it's a bloke called Dave, and he just happened to knock on the door of a house where this woman's son was called Dave, and the guy comes into the lounge. His mum says, someone waiting for you here, Dave, to see you. And he walks in and sees Bob Dylan in the lounge having tea. What a beautiful story. I think the guy then took him to the studios. It's really beautiful. There's lots of different variations on that story, but Bob Dylan did come to Crouch End, and I believe he did record at those studios. Now, here's a mad thing, and it's part of the magic of Crouch End, is that I came down this street, which is closed off, to find a quiet place to tell my Bob Dylan Dave story. But I've realised I've never seen this building here. It's beautiful, isn't it? It's Hornsey Library. What a magnificent building. I would have headed straight down to the Broadway if I hadn't told the Dave story. What a great building. There you go, opened by Princess Alexandra in 1965. I've not heard of that Alexandra before. The only Alexandra I'm aware of is the one that Alexandra Palace is named after. Just went inside for a little walk around, also to see if I could pick up any local information. That's a really beautiful building there. That's a real gem. It's actually worth coming up just to come for a visit to Hornsey Library. So we're going to go down to the Broadway now. The clock tower. I've got to tell you all about the whole rest of the undead stuff. What else we've got to look at? The amazing town hall. Other stuff as well, maybe a slightly macabre story that I think I can't really leave out, even though it's quite gruesome. The Harringay Arms is a great pub. Well, I say I haven't been in there for a number of years. It's where I went actually on the day I did the walk for my book. I ended up having a pint in the Harringay Arms. Really solid boozer. It looks like it may have been jazzed up a little bit in a way that may change my opinion of it, but I won't be going in there today. And nor will I be going into the magnificent King's Head over there, famous for its comedy club. Many a comedy career was started there. Isn't that where Jack Dee did his very first gig? It's also where I did my very last gig as well, stand-up comedy. Great, legendary venue that is. Here's the majestic old Hornsey Town Hall. I believe it's like grade 2 listed. Beautiful Art Deco interiors, which I have never actually seen, but it was built in 1935 for the London Borough of Hornsey, or the Metropolitan Borough, Municipal Borough of Hornsey, which then went out of existence in 1965 when London was reorganised, and it was merged with the boroughs of Tottenham and Wood Green to form the London Borough of Harringay. This building, I think, has had various uses since then, and apparently now it's, I don't know, it was going to be Mount View Drama School, and I think there's inevitably plans to enter some sort of hotel and sort of entertainment centre, I think. It's difficult to imagine it now, that Crouch End's all kind of very shishy and upmarket, but when I used to come here, like in the early 90s, it was kind of a bit natty. A little bit dusty and natty. It was sort of quite, it was a combination of people living in bedsits and old people living in houses they'd had forever. And I think it had that really kind of unusual feeling because it was kind of cut off from the rest of London by the fact that it's in this valley, this very steep-sided valley, and there's no tube or no train stations. The only way in and out is by bus. And it's, you know, you've got to go to Highgate or to Finsbury Park to connect to the tube network, because the overground back then was very unreliable. I mean, they nearly shut it at that period of time, the London Overground. So it gave it a kind of really peculiar feel where it didn't feel like it was connected to the rest of London. And here's the crown jewels of Crouch End. It's magnificent red brick clock tower. This was originally the site, though, of a wooden cross that stood here in the Middle Ages. That is the most likely origins of the name Crouch End, meaning crouch was an old word for a cross, and end being a kind of outlying district, and the name Crouch End has been recorded since the Middle Ages. It was built to memorialise, put his name up, Henry Reader Williams. That's my memory of the notes I've just recently read, and he's responsible for kind of shaping the district and also for helping to preserve Queen's Wood in Highgate, so for that we can thank him. I also remember reading in the wonderful Hornsey Gazette when I lived up in this area in the early 90s that it was believed that two ley lines crossed here at the Broadway, two powerful ley lines, and that was why so many kind of hippies came to live here in the 70s, which gave this area its kind of artsy, kind of slightly natty feel, and why so many also musicians came here. Sort of by the early 90s it was sort of synonymous with Guardian journalists and employees of the BBC. I'm not sure whether they came here because of the power of the ley lines though. Another misremembered factoid from that time is that Tottenham Lane here, it has the appearance of a Victorian seaside town, doesn't it, if you think about those kind of places. And that was because the architect who laid out Tottenham Lane, who designed it and built it, had built many of the seaside towns on the south coast. I don't know how true that is. So Crouch End and the undead go back a long way. The esteemed 15th century astrologist Roger Bolingbroke was charged with communicating with the undead in a plot against Henry VI. My two favourite Crouch End undead references are first Will Self in his wonderful short story The North London Book of the Dead, where a man mourning his dead mother comes to Crouch End and sees her wandering the streets, and it turns out that after you die, all that happens is that you move to Crouch End. And of course, the amazing, the kind of groundbreaking Zomcom Shaun of the Dead. Some of the key scenes are shot around Crouch End, the Shaun's flat and the corner shop he goes to on the day that he realises there's been a zombie outbreak. That was not far away from the Broadway in Nelson Road. I recreated that scene of him walking into the shop and buying an ice cream, or cornetto, and a can of soft drink for my book, This Other London. I suppose the question is, do we go to Cranley Gardens, Hornsey, which is where Dennis Nilsen, the notorious serial killer, committed some of his crimes, and it's where his crimes were discovered. It's a bit of a macabre for my usual thing, isn't it? But I feel like people will expect me to go there and tell the story of how Nick Papadimitriou spent time in prison with Dennis Nilsen. But it's down there. I'm not sure. What do you think? There's always rich pickings at the Oxfam bookshop there. Got this wonderful pictorial history of Upper Street and a really good copy of the Camden History Review. I've got a few of these, and this one has an essay on the Civil War defences around St Pancras. So expect to see both of these featuring in future walks. So I feel like Cranley Gardens and the gruesome crimes of Dennis Nilsen is a bit too macabre for me. I feel a bit uncomfortable about going down Cranley Gardens and finding the house. I did that by accident actually when I first moved to Harringay. Very late at night, found myself and my mates in Cranley Gardens. My instinct is to go along Tottenham Lane. Actually, I also want to go to the Hornsey School of Art, or the old Hornsey School of Art, and find the two cinemas. So I won't lie as well, I kind of fancy a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, because that's always one of the things I always used to do when I came to Crouch End, was go to a cafe and have a tea or a coffee. In fact, I remember like writing a sort of a little piece of writing when I started to try to write when I was a student about indexing cafes and recording the price and the quality of the donuts. It was quirky, you know. The Railway Tavern, that's one of Crouch End's iconic pubs. I'm trying to think whether I've ever been in there or not. I must have been in there at least once. And at the top of Hornsey Rise here, just where I turned off actually onto the Parkland Walk, is where there is the site of the iconic Hornsey School of Art, where Ray Davies of the Kinks, he studied there. It became the site of a notorious occupation in 1968, which is sort of linked to the events in Paris in '68, a centre for London radicalism. Now it's a school. All right, let's loop back down the Broadway. I've been doing circuits around the Broadway for the last hour. Let's go down there, go down Tottenham Lane. That's where I feel the draw. That's the pull, not up the hill to Muswell Hill or Alexandra Palace. That will probably be another day. Who knows? Who knows? onwards down Tottenham Lane. And actually over there on the left I can see where there's now the Virgin Active Gym. That was the Crouch End Hippodrome, which was opened in 1897 as an opera house. And then in the early 20th century it became a popular music hall. I think it was badly bombed in the Second World War, but it lives on now as a gym, which I suppose is a apt transition. And it looks as if the Queen's pub here has had a bit of a zhizh up. It's been very nicely restored by the looks of it from peering through the window. I think I read online that this is the same people that did up the Salisbury down there on Green Lanes, and I went in there when I did my Moselle walk, and that's really good. The Salisbury's always been a great pub. I'm trying to think, the Queen's I think was a little bit more rough around the edges from memory, but I could be wrong. So here is the Crouch End Picture House. I can't remember what that building used to be, but that's a major development here on Tottenham Lane. And literally just a few doors down we have the art house, the Crouch End Art House Cinema. So there's a little cluster of cinemas. It's gone from having none to having two. Wow. Fern Park Road down there is one of the old real principal thoroughfares of Crouch End, a classic road that is. So I signed off a video about 7 years ago on the corner here of Nelson Road and Tottenham Lane, and I said I would come back to do a Crouch End walk one day, and it's taken me that long to come back and actually do it. In the true spirit of this being a Crouch End wander, a stroll around the uncanny suburb, I'm actually doubling back on myself slightly, and I'm going to peel off Tottenham Lane. I'm going to stop going along Tottenham Lane and peel off around through the streets until it gets dark, and then beyond that point. As tempting as it is to go up to Alexandra Palace for the sunset, I think I'll save that for another day, Alexandra Palace. So I think we've ticked off, most of the major locations that I had in my notes around Crouch End. So Muswell Hill, like I say, I think that is in another video. I think I put that at the end of my Parkland Walk video, but perhaps I didn't. But so I know the route I want to take for Alexandra Palace. I want to walk up the Harringay ladder. Maybe, well, actually, it's following the New River really, but there's a lovely passageway that cuts across the streets near Whiteman Road. We'll do that from Harringay Green Lanes. We'll walk up the Harringay Passage and then cut up to Alexandra Palace, and then walk the northern section of the Parkland Walk. There you go, that's a walk for another day, isn't it? So I don't want to kind of just go up to Alexandra Palace and get there for the dark and not properly do it. I also want to make sure I know where the train stations were as well. But yeah, let's just wander the streets. I love it here so much. These are some really interesting sort of Art Deco-ish houses here in Rokesley Avenue. Reminds me of the kind of thing you get in the northwestern suburbs. I can feel myself naturally being drawn back to the vortex of the clock tower, sucking me in with its powerful ley line energy. So I think this is a good time to sign off. I might include some more shots in the end credits, but that was I'm really so glad I came and made this video today. Came up here and finally made just dedicated Crouch End video, not Crouch End, Muswell Hill and Alexandra Palace, just Crouch End. It deserves its own dedicated video. So thanks for joining me on that wonderful walk. Thanks to my wonderful supporters on Patreon and channel members here on YouTube, and thanks for coming along on these walks with me every week. I love having you along with me. You're such wonderful company. So as I always like to say, I look forward to seeing you on the next walk, wherever that may be. And I don't really know, I mean, maybe we will do that Alexandra Palace walk. I mean, it's quite nice to kind of save it for a bit, isn't it? I feel like I need to go back and do Soho Part 2, Whitechapel Part 2. I mean, so many places to walk, and I've got those those brochures, those journals that I picked up. Walks beget walks, and it's endless.